I just can't get my mind off this haunted attraction I visited in Orlando back in 2006. If you've been there, you might remember it. Skull Kingdom. That attraction on International Drive with the massive skull facade that seemed to scream at passing cars. I was on vacation with my family that summer, and what happened there, well, let's just say it's starting to make me question everything I thought I knew about my past. I was 13 when we visited Orlando. The typical family vacation, Disney World, Universal Studios, the whole tourist experience. But what I remember most was convincing my parents to let my older sister and I check out this haunted house we kept driving past. The place looked incredibly cheesy from the outside, but something about it kept drawing my attention every time we passed. On our last night in Orlando, our parents finally caved. They dropped us off at around 8 p.m., saying they'd be back to get us in a couple hours. I remember waiting in line with my sister, Sarah, literally shaking with fear before going into the house, and then loving every second of it. But when I mentioned this to her last month, she looked at me like I was crazy. She swears we walked in and immediately turned around, then just walked out because I was too scared. But that can't be right. I have such vivid memories of the place, like how she almost fell over when this vampire jumped out at us in the mirror maze, and the weird characters with the plain white faces. I can still visually see it all in my mind. The more I try to piece together what happened, the less it makes sense. I remember going through the attraction, but I can't get the layout quite right in my head. Sometimes I recall the torture chamber being right after the entrance. Other times it was near the end. I also distinctly remember a room full of medieval animatronics that were just surrounding us with weapons and slowly sliding towards us. But every time I try to remember the rest, I can't quite get the details. I've attempted researching Skull Kingdom online, looking for photos or videos from that era. I found some, but they're almost always just at the front of the place, never inside. I even found an old map of the attraction, but it shows a completely different layout than what I remember going through. I started reaching out to other people who visited Skull Kingdom back then, through Reddit and an old Orlando tourism Facebook group. But that's when things got really weird. Everybody seems to remember different versions of the place. Some people recall it being 2 stories tall, others insist it was only 1. Some remember graphic scenes of violence, others say it was extremely tame. But there's one thing that keeps coming up: the masking room. A lot of people mention seeing a door with that name on it. The thing is, it appears in different locations in everyone's stories. Some saw it upstairs, others on the ground floor. A few people even claim they went in and that it was filled from the floor to the ceiling with these deformed face masks. Ever since I started looking into it, I've been having these really weird dreams too. Pretty much feeling like they're totally real until I wake up and realize I was asleep. In the dreams, I'm back in the haunt, but the rooms never end. They just each slightly change from one room to the next, leading deeper into more and more bizarre spaces. Sometimes I catch glimpses of other people walking through as well, only they have those faces with no features I mentioned before, and just seem to wander aimlessly. A few days ago, something happened that really freaked me out. I was cleaning out my dresser and found an old receipt from the place buried under my magic card collection. It was faded and crumpled, but as I picked it up, I suddenly remembered having someone with us who bought the ticket that night. A 20-something-year-old guy who feels close when I think about him, only I can't remember anything else. They demolished the building years ago, but when I was looking through old vacation photos, I noticed something odd in the background of a few of them. In pictures that have nothing to do with Skull Kingdom, photos from Disney World or Old Town, I can see that skull facade in the distance, where it couldn't possibly have been. The attraction was located miles from where they were taken. Hardly anyone seems to remember actually going into Skull Kingdom. You'd think a prominent attraction on idrive would have had more video online or photos, but they're mostly just from the front or under the initial facade. I mean, it was 2006 and there were less cameras, but still, other places have way more footage out there. Also, no one really knows why it closed. Based on some accounts, Skull Kingdom had been struggling for years. However, every time I saw it at night, there were tons of people out front. Nobody really asked questions when it closed either. They just assumed it had finally gone bankrupt, like so many other haunted attractions in the city. The more I've investigated Skull Kingdom's history, the stranger things have gotten. According to county records, the building permit was issued in March 1992, with an estimated construction time of 18 months. But I found a tourist's photo dated April 1992, showing the building fully complete. Building something that complex would have taken months just for the skull entrance alone. I dug deeper into local news from that period. Construction crews reportedly only worked at night, and nearby business owners complained about strange humming sounds coming from behind the construction barriers. One forum mentioned that no one ever saw building materials being delivered, yet the structure seemed to be more complete every morning. The project manager, when interviewed, claimed they were ahead of schedule but couldn't provide basic details about the construction process. The land's history before Skull Kingdom was disturbing as well. In the 1970s, it was supposed to be the site of a small shopping center, but 3 different development companies abandoned their plans after breaking ground. The last company's architect reportedly went missing after visiting the site alone one evening to take measurements. When they found him 3 days later wandering along idrive, he could only mumble about how they're saving it for something. The weirdest part about all of this is every time I go back to verify these historical details, I find slightly different information. It's like the truth about that plot of land is as unstable as my memories of the attraction itself. I've tried keeping a journal of everything I know about the night I went there, but the entries seem to keep changing after I'm done. That's mostly why I made this video, so that there would be more witnesses of it happening after some part of the story changes. I'm wondering if the place is still communicating with me somehow. In fact, the more I think about it, the less sure I am that Skull Kingdom was even a haunted house at all. Maybe it was something else entirely. An entity, maybe, that chose to look like a tourist attraction. One that changes once it's taken enough people, psychologically manipulating the others who think they experienced it. Because in the end, it seems that no one really knows what went on in Skull Kingdom. And I'm guessing they probably never will.